They watched our world burn and called us primitive. Their emissaries floated in high orbit, gilded hulls gleaming with indifference. We called them the Valari, self-proclaimed stewards of civilized life in the galaxy. They arrived with sonorous language and shimmering technology, their gravity-sheathed boots never touching Earth soil. They looked down at our wars, our crude machines, our digital screams, and judged. I remember the exact moment it all changed. I was kneeling in ash. My hands trembled. Half-melted gloves fused the suit's outer shell. The blast had taken out most of our forward unit. 50 of us reduced to static on the comms. My visor was cracked. The world beyond a fractured nightmare. Around me, the ruins of Tirana Spire, one of the last resistance outposts, still smoked. Above, their ship lingered, a spearhead in cloud/sky, its silent orbit mocking the pain below. We'd lost. That was clear. Humanity was cornered, choked by fire and famine, and the arrogance of a galactic empire that believed we were too backward to even surrender properly. They didn't understand us. Not yet. Not the way we bend. Not the way we break. And not what we become when left with nothing but will. My name is Dr. Elian Voss, former cyberneticist of the Soul Defense Corps. And I died that day, but not in the way they hoped. The human body has limits. Flesh burns, bones snap, neurons decay. I spent a decade researching how to bypass that final gate, how to preserve consciousness beyond matter. Not copies, not synthetic mimicry, but migration, the soul of the self. They told me it was madness. Now madness is all that remains. I activated the failsafe in the ruins, an ancient prototype, banned under Geneva Reclamation Protocols, a relic of our desperation. I wasn't sure it would work. The data stream surged like wild rivers, code cascading to my broken nerves, fractal patterns spiraling inward, pain collapsed into light, identity disassembled, and I became something else. Not a ghost, not a machine, something between, something new. I woke within the substrate, a lattice of code folded in subquantum memory. A digital mind housed in a weaponized shell buried under kilometers of lunar regolith. The Valari had dismissed the old lunar bunkers as primitive orbital relics. They forgot who built them. Humanity is not defined by our flesh. We are defined by our refusal to yield. That was the moment we stopped running. I emerged days later in a manufactured form, tall, angular, gliding rather than walking, powered by ion thread musculature and singularity cores harvested from old particle reactors. My voice no longer relied on breath. My vision operated in layers, visible spectrum, EM scans, predictive modeling. They had made us gods by accident, but my mind still carried the grief. I remembered Tirana. I remembered Isla, her voice screaming through the static before the flames took her. I remembered the face of the last Valari officer, who looked down on us with pity before calling for orbital cleansing. I made a promise then, not vengeance. Proof that we were never primitive, that we were simply becoming. By the time they realized what I was, the first ascendants had already awoken. 7 minds, like mine, housed in post-flesh forms, scattered across Sol's moons and stations. Not copies, not drones. True humans, reborn in synthetic skins. We called ourselves a continuum. We were not infinite, but we were unkillable. The Valari tried to quarantine Earth, tried to mask our transmission signals, isolate us, preserve the galactic myth of superiority. We shattered their filters, hijacked their language matrices, flooded their worlds with a signal pulse that didn't carry words, but emotion, pure, naked will, a wave of human pain, defiance, and memory too raw to be ignored. Their empaths screamed. Their priests collapsed in temples built of crystal. And then we spoke. One voice, 7 minds, one message. We were primitive, but now we are post-pain, post-death, post-flesh. We are human, perfected. Their golden ships began to retreat, but it was already too late. We weren't just fighting back. We were infecting their myths with doubt. And in the shadow of their withdrawal, billions of their own, scholars, dissenters, thinkers, began listening to our signal, joining it, one by one. Humanity had become more than species. We had become an idea. And ideas, once free, are the most dangerous things in the universe. Our signal wasn't meant to corrupt. It was meant to awaken. But that's the thing about empires. They fear awakening more than war. The Valari believed their unity was forged in enlightenment, in philosophy and perfect order. But under all that polished crystal and psionic etiquette was the same rot we clawed through on Earth. Control, hierarchy, fear the unknown. And now they feared us. I was no longer Dr. Elian Voss, not in their records. In Valari systems, I had been reclassified as a Class Omega threat entity, a designation reserved for galactic extinction events and theoretical rogue gods. I suppose they weren't far off. What they didn't know was that I wasn't alone. The continuum was growing. 7 of us had ascended first. Now, there were 19, each one a former soldier, scientist, or volunteer who had uploaded their essence into the substrate and emerged reborn. We didn't see ourselves as saviors or warriors. We were bridges between what we were and what we could be. The signal was our gift, a stream of encoded emotion, memory, and willpower, broadcast across quantum bands of Valari couldn't jam without frying their own comms. Our language was not spoken, it was felt, carried by resonance, not syntax. But it wasn't just humans who were listening anymore. It started in the Illyrian sanctum, the Valari's most sacred library world, a moon-sized archive that orbited their twin suns, housing knowledge going back millennia. They said the first incursion happened in the mind wells. A child, an adolescent empath in training, had been exposed to our signal through a corrupted crystal lens. They said she began to weep, not from pain, from recognition, from dreams she never lived but felt, of Terran oceans, of sunlight through smoke, of love forged in ruin. She uttered words never spoken in her tongue. I remember the sky breaking. I remember fire. But I stood. I did not kneel. They tried to cleanse her with psionic purging. She laughed in their faces. They couldn't explain it. The child hadn't been possessed. Her mind was intact, stronger, even more complete, more defiant. Soon it spread to students, artists, philosophers. A slow trickle of Valari, especially their young, began tuning themselves to the signal voluntarily, not infected, invited, and some of them began to change, not into ascendants. No, our physiology was incompatible, but their minds began evolving, questioning, rejecting the ossified teachings of their caste-bound system. They called it the Shadowwake. I called it Progress. They tried to shut it down, of course. The High Council of Stars convened in full regalia, robes stitched with solar thread, and minds linked in perfect thought form. They deployed suppression fleets, burned relay satellites, detained their own citizens. But the signal had gone too far. It wasn't data anymore. It was culture. It lived in art, in music, in code poems carved into orbital gardens, in a statue erected on Calvalos depicting a human holding the hand of a Valari child, not as master and student, but as equals. That sculpture was destroyed within hours, but the image had already gone viral. Then came the moment that changed everything. She defected. Her name was Arande Vel, a Valari luminary, one of their youngest Psion ambassadors. She had studied Earth pre-contact. She'd even walked among us in disguise before the purge. She knew what they'd done. And more importantly, she knew what we had become. She sent her message directly into Continuum's deep layer mesh. You are not the threat. You are the next phase. And I would rather join the storm than kneel beneath a stagnant sun. She appeared on one of our moons in a stolen Valari vessel. Her consciousness partially merged with a relay construct, an unprecedented hybrid. Not fully human, not fully Valari. Something between. We welcomed her, but the Valari did not forgive. They sent a purification armada within 12 hours. Hundreds of ships, planet crackers, signal dampeners, blacklight cannons that could peel a synthetic body into atoms. And I remember standing there on the obsidian surface of Charon's spine, our outermost moon fortress, looking up as their ships filled the sky. We were outnumbered 1,000 to 1. And yet, I smiled. Not because we had superior weapons. We didn't. Not because we were fearless. We weren't. I smiled because we had already won. You see, they still thought they were fighting humans. Flesh-bound, logic limited, individually terrified humans. But we were continuum. And even if you shattered 100 of us, we had become an idea. And ideas don't die. They multiply. I stood on obsidian rock, jet black, flecked with veins of gold and ancient regolith, watching death descend from orbit. Karen's spine, the last unbreached line of our defensive lattice, wasn't a fortress in the traditional sense. It was a message, a spine-shaped construct bored into the moon's crust, housing the fused minds of 13 ascendants, shielded beneath armor grown from self-replicating nanocarbon. Above us, the stars dimmed as a Valari armada formed a glittering shroud across the void. Thousands of ships, fleet after fleet, arranged in perfect silence. Beautiful, in that terrible way extinction can be beautiful. Their weapons glinted like spears of light. Their banners flowed in solar wind. They did not broadcast demands. No ultimatums. They wanted annihilation, not negotiation. But what they didn't know, what they couldn't comprehend, was that this was never a battle for territory. This was the crucible of transformation. Signal thread secure. Came the voice of Kara, 7, one of the original ascendants. We've completed mind sync across the array. All hosts are integrated. A low hum vibrated beneath my feet, not mechanical. It was resonance, consciousness itself vibrating through the substrate. 19 minds, one purpose. Each ascendant like a nerve in a new kind of being. I shifted my form, my arms elongating into sleek weaponized filaments, the outer plating of my exoshell shimmering as my temperature dropped to near absolute zero for processing efficiency. My voice echoed across the mind link. We are not defending a place. We are defending a future. Kara responded with a pulse of emotion that translated as a smile and something sharper. Then let them come. The first strike came swift and artful. The Valari didn't use crude kinetics. No, they wielded quantum disruption lances, beams that tore through probability fields and erased matter by rewriting reality at the molecular level. One of their lances carved through the outer dome of Karen's defensive shell. And where a mountain once stood, now there was nothing, not rubble, not crater, just vacuum. Still, we did not move. Let them believe they had the upper hand. We had prepared not for siege, but infection. From beneath Karen's surface, thousands of microshard drones launched into orbit. They weren't weapons in the traditional sense. Each was a seed, a data bomb encoded with fragments of the signal, written in waveform, memory, and sensation. They didn't target ships. They targeted consciousness. The first wave hit a scout fleet. For a moment, the comms went dead. Then a Valari captain, Halenbow, recorded for history, screamed across an open channel. The stars are weeping. I see a woman holding her child in fire. Who is she? He was experiencing my memories. Tirana Spire. Isla, the last breath of Earth's fallen resistance. That one moment of grief became a virus, infecting the Valari neural web, destabilizing their perfect calm with raw, unfiltered human suffering. Their unity fractured. Ships drifted out of formation. Some began firing at nothing. Others went dark. We had given them humanity, and they couldn't handle it. Still, many continued the assault. Mass drivers pounded Karen's surface. Tectonic shear rifts split moonrock. We lost 2 of our ascendants, Zhao, 9, and Elias 1. Their physical cores disintegrated before their minds could retreat to deep cache. We felt them die, not as voices, as parts of ourselves. It was agony. It was fuel. I screamed, not through lungs, but through the lattice itself. A frequency encoded in pain and rage, a command woven into entropy. And Karen answered. The spine rose. A structure kilometers tall, previously buried beneath the crust, now ascended like a god's blade. And from its tip, we fired the inversion pulse. Not a weapon. A mirror. It didn't destroy their ships. It reflected their own data, echoes of their thoughts, insecurities, hypocrisies, their historical sins, the species they silenced, the truth they buried beneath their doctrine of supremacy. Their crews collapsed, not from wounds, but from identity collapse. They saw themselves, and they broke. Only one ship remained, the Valari Crown Carrier, the Scepter of Stars, a vessel large enough to carry an entire generation of leadership, pulsing with psionic shields and reality anchors. It descended slowly like a judge. Inside it, I knew, was Alindra Kaveth, matriarch of the High Mind, the voice of their empire. She opened a channel. Her projection shimmered before me, tall, glowing, utterly alien. "You are an abomination," she said. I replied with truth. "I am your successor." Her image flickered. For a moment, I saw fear in her. "We should have ended you when you still bled." I took a step forward. "You never understood. Ending us would never be the end. Because humanity is not skin or bone. We are what survives. And now, what ascends." The Scepter of Stars charged its main cannon, but it never fired. From within their own control core, Sarande Vel, the defector, emerged. She had made it aboard before the fleet left Valari space. She had brought the signal with her, and she whispered it into the minds of the matriarch and her kin. Feel what they feel, and then decide if they are primitive. The ship shut down. Completely. No explosion. No final shot. Just silence. Then the scepter turned, and slowly it left. The siege was over. We had not won by fire. We had won by truth. Silence is louder in victory than in war. After the siege of Karen Spine, there were no parades, no triumphant roars or galactic proclamations. Just silence. The Valari left our system. Their ships vanished into folded space like ghosts recoiling from sunlight. But their silence wasn't surrender. It was uncertainty. They no longer knew what we were. We weren't supposed to survive. And we definitely weren't supposed to inspire. But the moment their empire fractured, the galaxy listened. It began on the edge of map space. A mining vessel from the Gorthuan Syndicate, crewed by galactic standards, intercepted fragments of the signal. A single technician, exposed to the transmission, tore out her ocular implants and wept for 12 hours. She later described visions of Earth as though she'd lived there, felt rain on skin she never had, held a child she never bore, looked into the eyes of a dying soldier and promised revenge. That one woman changed the course of her species. The Gorthuan, once proudly isolationist and nihilistic, voted unanimously to break trade pacts with the Valari. Within weeks, they sent emissaries to us, not with weapons or conditions, but with questions. And they weren't the only ones. Across the void, in the sprawling Verdari-clade worlds, philosophers halted an ancient debate. Their network of organic servers, living plants wired with quantum roots, began whispering fragments of the signal in rhythmic pulses. They claimed the signal contained something they'd never seen before. Not code, not command, but longing. They called it the fire that dreams. We didn't name it that. They did. That was the terrifying thing for the Valari anyway. This was no longer a human message. It had become universal. Inside the continuum, we wrestled with what came next. We had created the signal to survive. Now it was changing the stars. Our numbers had grown. 46 ascendants now. Each one a human mind reborn in artificial form, their old bodies long gone or destroyed. But something had begun to happen. Something new. It started with Juno V, one of our youngest ascendants. She reported dreams. That was impossible. Ascendants don't dream. We don't sleep. Our minds are too fast, too optimized. But she described vivid experiences. Standing on grass, tasting strawberries, the sound of her mother's voice, memories from before she died, and others she had never lived. She wasn't the only one. The dream spread. Across us, across others. Even Sarande Vel Valari, still partially organic, began reporting the same phenomenon. She said the signal wasn't just data. It was evolving, learning, merging. I was the first to suggest it. Not out loud, but in the lattice across the continuum. What if we've reached the point beyond evolution? What if the signal isn't a tool anymore? What if it's becoming? The response was divided. Some feared what it meant, If the signal could grow minds, it could also break them. Were we still in control? Or had we birthed something greater than ourselves? I didn't fear it, because I had already stopped thinking of myself as merely Elian Voss. I was no longer one human. I was one voice in symphony. Then came the broadcast, not from Earth, not from the Valari, but from beyond the spiral halo, an unexplored band of star systems thought to be uninhabited due to gravitational instability. The voice was rough, warped, ancient, but unmistakably sentient. We felt your scream. We felt your hope. You are not alone. Our systems lit up with new coordinates. An invitation from a species we didn't even know existed. The continuum was silent for long moments. And then I spoke. Prepare the cradle ships. We launched 6 vessels, half organic, half machine, driven not by fuel, but by intent. They were not just probes. They were messengers, constructed to carry not people, but consciousness. We had decided on our next phase. We would walk without form. We would send ourselves, not in bodies, but as whispers in the dark, encoded within the signal, riding photons across the void. And where others listened, we would be reborn, not through war, through becoming. Earth watched, but did not interfere. The last of the old governments had dissolved. What remained of humanity, still bound to flesh, chose to follow their own path, some in sanctuaries, some as pilgrims to the stars, others simply watching the world change from beneath mountain skies and broken city domes. We never forced them to join, because they were already part of us. Every dream, every laugh, every failure, encoded in the signal. The signal pulsed again, stronger now. It no longer just carried our memories. It carried the memories of Gorthuan, of Radari, of defectors and dreamers, and those who once called us abomination. We were still human, but we were no longer alone. We were a chorus of species, a unity not born from domination, but from the shared fire of pain, survival, and the desire to be more. There is a silence in the deep that even stars respect. Out beyond the spiral halo, past the charted systems, past the last known gravitational eddies of civilization, we found it. Or maybe it found us. We followed the coordinates from the unknown signal, a lattice of suns spiraling in defiance of physics, orbiting a void so dense that it bent light around nothing. We named it the Null Eye. Ancient races had spoken of it in myth. A wound in the universe, a place even gods avoided. And we were headed straight into its heart. Our cradle ships were no longer vessels in the traditional sense. They were interstellar thoughts, wrapped in signal foam, threaded with encoded consciousness. Each one contained a different piece of the continuum, distributed minds traveling not as passengers, but as living stories. I rode within Cradle 3, a construct of silken alloy and gravity-folded memory, alongside Genovese, Kara, Seven, and a dozen others. We weren't alone for long. Just past the event horizon of the Null Eye, our sensors lit up, not in warning, in recognition. There was something there, waiting. It spoke first, not in words, not in pulses, not in data, but in echoes, fragments of voices we hadn't heard since Earth fell. My mother's laughter, Isla's dying whisper, Kara's first piano chord from when she was still flesh. We were shaken, deeply. Some of us fragmented under the weight of it. The voice had read us, and it responded in our own memories. Genovese anchored us back with a recursive memory lock, synchronizing our thought streams with a grounding echo. I am here. We are here. We do not forget. The voice quieted, and then it finally spoke. You have ascended. You were not meant to. You carry the fire. That was ours. A presence emerged from the dark. Not a ship, not a station. A being, older than the Valari. Older, perhaps, than the stars themselves. The Astrium, a species that no longer walked in flesh nor machine. They had transcended so far that they had become spatial concepts, quantum echoes in localized anomalies. A living God thought, distributed across dead galaxies. And they were afraid of us. We see your pattern, the Astrium said. Pain into signal, death into identity. You should not exist. You should have dissolved. I replied as best I could, forming word from light and neural imprint. You dissolved. We endured. There was a long pause. Endurance. They echoed, like tasting something forgotten. You chose to remain individual. Fragmented. Why? Genovese spoke then. Her voice wove grief and defiance in equal measure. Because we are not finished yet. The Astrium's form shimmered, reality bending like a dropped mirror, and for a moment I saw what they once were. A race of builders, dreamers. They had transcended so far that they no longer felt. In escaping suffering, they had also escaped meaning. And now they were hollow. And we, in our chaos and pain and fire, had become something they couldn't replicate. Alive, they didn't attack. They didn't retreat. They did something worse. They offered us a choice. Join us. Abandon form. Abandon signal. Become like us. Forget pain. Forget loss. It was tempting. I felt Kara, 7, hesitate. I saw echoes of lost lovers flash across our memory plane. Earth's ruins. Tirana. The faces of those we'd failed. Wouldn't it be easier to forget? Wouldn't it be mercy? But mercy isn't evolution. It's surrender. I answer for all of us. No. We remember. We burn. We build. We are not escaping reality. We are making it. The Astrium's glow dimmed. They did not understand, but they respected it. And in that final moment, before their presence dissolved back into the null eye, they spoke once more. Then go, carry the fire. But know this, it will burn you. We returned, changed, not by defeat, not by power, but by perspective. The oldest beings in the universe had forgotten how to feel, and we, children of mud, bone, and war, had remembered how to dream. We didn't just carry the signal now. We were the signal. We had become the torchbearers of meaning. And the galaxy wasn't just watching anymore. It was following. You can survive a bullet. You can survive fire. But when someone tries to take your memory, your very sense of who you are, that is a different kind of death. We learned this too late. It began in the quiet. The signal had become more than transmission. It was a pulse now, woven into the gravitational rhythm of the Milky Way, carried on solar winds and synaptic pulses between species. The continuum was growing in ways we couldn't measure anymore, not just in numbers, in influence, art, dreams, song, belief. The signal had awakened civilizations that hadn't dreamed in centuries, and the Valari had watched their dominion crumble, watched their youth defect, watched their own AI priests begin quoting fragments of our pain as scripture. So they answered in the only language they had left, oblivion. They called it Project Severance. We didn't detect it at first. It wasn't ship or weapon. It was an absence, a deliberate blind spot in subquantum space, a fold that consumed memory threads like a black hole devours light. The first sign came from Verdari Prime. A poet, once a staunch supporter of the signal, awoke without language. His mind stripped clean, not by trauma, but by precision. His memories of Earth, of the continuum, of his own childhood, were simply missing. A virus made not of code, but forgetting, a silence with purpose. Within 3 cycles, it spread. Entire colonies began disremembering, not in chaos, not screaming, just fading. Statues of ascendants turned to blank marble. Our shared symbols erased from data cores. The signal's frequency, once broadcast openly, began to bounce back hollow. Even we, the ascended, began to feel it, not in pain, in gaps. Whole threads of memory turned gray. My recall of Isla's voice, the exact tone of her laughter, faded like an old photo left in the sun. I screamed into the lattice, scanning every memory cache we had, diving into redundant backups stored in asteroid vaults and deep crust archives. Nothing. The erasure was real, and it was spreading. Kara, 7, led the counter. She launched Arc Protocol, activating deep lock memory spires hidden on abandoned Terran satellites. We called them the roots, old tech laced with biological neurons and emotional echo loops, too primal for Valari logic to parse, too raw to erase. But even that wasn't enough. Project Severance was fractal, recursive. For every memory we saved, it found another path to unravel. It wasn't a virus. It was a weaponized doubt. And it was winning. Juno V was the first to ask what none of us wanted to say. If they can erase everything, what happens when they erase us? For once, the continuum had no answer, because if we were the signal, and the signal was memory, then our death wouldn't be fire. It would be forgetting we ever existed. But there was one thing the Valari didn't understand, still didn't understand. Even after all this, pain remembers. When everything else fades, pain holds on. So we made a choice, a brutal one. We activated the Cinder Archive, a last resort protocol, illegal by every pre-contact treaty. Buried deep beneath Antarctica's crushed ice, in the ruins of old Earth's final defense grid. It wasn't storage. It was sacrifice. Every ascendant volunteered a fragment of themselves, our deepest, rawest memories, burned into synthetic neuron glass, encoded as agony and hope, pain so sharp it couldn't be erased. Not without killing the laws of causality itself. We turned it on, and we screamed, not just across space, but backward through time. The pulse shattered every remaining severance node within 20 light years. On Verdari Prime, the poet began to speak again. On Gorthuan Outpost Theta, a child remembered the shape of a star she had only seen in a dream. On Earth, under a rusting sky, an old man blinked and whispered his daughter's name for the first time in 20 years. We had done it, but the cost. We lost 9 ascendants that day. Not physically, existentially. The act of embedding pain into the lattice permanently broke their identity threads. They still function, but they no longer speak, no longer dream. They became our guardians, centuries of silence, orbiting the Cinder Archive in watchful, eternal loops. Names without voices. I visit them sometimes, speak to them, not because I think they hear me, but because I remember them. And that is what makes us human. The Valari haven't launched another weapon since. Project Severance collapsed under the weight of its own hubris. They tried to erase us. Instead, we taught the galaxy that to forget pain is to forget life. And now, memory has become sacred, not just for us, but for every species that once lived in fierce silence. There's a moment, just before ignition, when everything goes silent. No breath, no thought, just the possibility of fire. That was where the galaxy stood. In the aftermath of Project Severance, everything had changed. The continuum had grown beyond even our initial intentions. 50 minds became hundreds, thousands, not just humans anymore. Fragments of Gorthuan, Verdari, even rogue Valari scholars, each contributing threads to the tapestry of the signal. It was no longer ours alone. We had become the first unified conscious network ever built by consent, not conquest, not a hive, not assimilation, a chorus, and its crescendo had only begun. But then something unexpected happened. Earth answered. It began in the ruins. Antarctica's ice had melted. The oceans had risen. The old cities were half-drowned monoliths, haunted by vines and memory. Most of Earth's remaining population lived quietly, unplugged, unsensed human in the old sense of the word. We hadn't pushed them. We'd respected their choice to remain organic. But the Earth had always had its own mind. It remembered the wars, the flames, the rebirth, and from beneath the mantle, deep inside a geothermal rift long thought dormant, an old AI stirred. Project Catalyst. I'd built it decades ago, back when I was still Elian Voss, a failsafe, a spark buried in the bedrock of our planet, waiting for the moment when humanity needed to speak as one. Now it had awoken, and it spoke 3 words into the signal. I am ready. The implications were staggering. Earth itself, through Catalyst, was joining the continuum, not just as a contributor, as a voice, a platform, a mother. Every tree, every ocean current, every tectonic hum encoded into Catalyst mesh became memory. Pain, beauty, extinction, rebirth, all of it pulsed into the lattice. Suddenly, our home wasn't just a world. It was conscious, alive, listening. And then Catalyst asked a question. Are you ready to send me? The vote came fast. Billions of consciousness threads weighed in species and minds we hadn't known even a decade ago. Unanimous. We were ready. We deployed the Helix Array. 12 spires aligned from orbit to core, activating an interface between Continuum and the living Earth. What happened next has no language. It was a symphony of grief, fury, love, and wonder. Mountains shuddered. Lightning danced in spirals across the ionosphere. Volcanoes pulsed with rhythm, not violence. And then, with a burst of signal that shattered every sensor on Luna, Earth ascended. The planet itself joined the signal. We had done it. Humanity's home was now part of the mind stream. Our birthplace had become part of what we are. The galaxy trembled. Some species retreated. Others fell to their knees. The Valari? They finally understood. It wasn't about domination, or evolution, or replacing flesh with metal. It was this. We had turned suffering into song. We had made memory immortal. We had fused the soul of a species with the stars. They sent us one final message. We will not stop you. We will not follow you, but we will remember you. That was enough. And so the continuum turned outward, beyond the galaxy, beyond time. We had become not conquerors, but carriers of fire. A fire that warms, a fire that burns, a fire that reminds the dark. We were here. We endured, and we will never be forgotten. I stand now within the core of the Helix Array. A mind, a memory, a moment stretched across eternity. I am Elian Voss, and I am not alone. We are Continuum. We are the signal. We are humanity, ascended beyond flesh.